The wind swept down Manhattan like something alive, a cold creature brushing its fingers against every exposed inch of skin, as if searching for weakness. Maria del Sol felt it in her bones long before it reached her face. She sat on a torn piece of cardboard beneath the flickering awning of an abandoned bodega, hugging her knees beneath the oversized coat she had found 2 winters prior in a church donation bin. The coat smelled faintly of mildew and old perfume, but it was warm, and warmth was a luxury she no longer questioned. Her breath fogged the frozen air as she tried to sip the last of the watery soup that sloshed in the paper cup beside her. She had stretched it as long as she could, savoring the heat more than the flavor. Food was no longer eaten. It was negotiated with, bargained with, prayed over. Every bite had to last. Every swallow had to be slow. She had learned to make rituals out of survival. New York glowed around her, indifferent and electric. Every light and every skyscraper felt like a reminder of the lives happening far above her reach. Lives that moved forward, lives that planned vacations and bought gifts and made reservations at restaurants whose prices she could no longer comprehend. She wondered sometimes if anyone in those glass cowers ever looked down and noticed the small figure wrapped in patchwork layers, trying to stay alive just a block away. She had not always been invisible. Before crossing the border, before debts and betrayals, before the winter that broke her spirit, she had been a girl who believed she could cook her way out of poverty. In Chiapas, she had spent years waking before the sun to help her mother prepare empanadas for the market. She knew every spice by smell, every kind of spoilage by sight. But in America, dreams dissolved quickly when reality demanded rent, demanded language, demanded money she did not have. She had washed dishes in a diner until an immigration raid scattered the staff like terrified birds. She had worked cleaning apartments until the injuries to her hands made the supervisors replace her with someone younger. Piece by piece, she had slipped out of the world of the living and into the margins. A siren screamed somewhere in the distance, bouncing off glass and steel. Maria pulled her coat closer and forced herself to stand. Hunger drove her toward the alley behind the tall corporate plaza, where the dumpsters from the luxury cafes and office kick-ins sometimes offered the remains of another world. She walked slowly, her boots slapping weakly against the pavement, her breath quickening at the thought of what she might find. When she reached the bin, she hesitated. Night after night, she had dug through its contents, but tonight something felt different. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was the exhaustion that made her heart feel heavier than her body. Still, hunger won, and she pressed her fingers against the edge, pulling the lid just enough to slip her hand in. The smell hit her immediately. Familiar, wrong, impossible to ignore. It was the faint acidic rot of spoiled protein mixed with a metallic note that made her stomach clench. She froze, leaning closer. Her instincts sharpened, memories flashing of childhood mornings when her mother would lift a bowl to her nose and say, "Esto no, está traicionando el olor." Her eyes focused on a discarded meal box, the sleek black kind used by corporate catering services. A logo glared up at her, Sterling Foods, the brand plastered across half the billboards in the city. She lifted the container, opened it, and recoiled. The dish looked normal under the dim light, but the smell, Maria knew that smell. Something had gone terribly wrong. She set the box back gently, heart pounding. A strange dread pulsed through her, not just for herself, but for anyone who might eat one of these meals tonight. Just as she stepped away, headlights cut across the plaza. A dark SUV rolled up to the curb, polished and silent. From it stepped a tall man in a tailored coat, followed by 2 bodyguards. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to being protected from every threat, every inconvenience, every cold wind that punished the rest of the city. In his hand he carried a meal box, identical to the one she had just opened. Maria's breath caught. The man paused beneath the street lamp, raising his fork, steam curling from the dish as if tempting him. She watched this scene unfold like a nightmare. Her feet moved before she could think, every survival instinct screaming at her to stay silent, to avoid attention, to never approach men with armed guards. But something inside her, something fierce and moral and stubborn, broke through the fear. She stepped into the light, her voice barely more than a rasp. "Don't eat that." The words seemed to fall out of her, small and brittle, but yet they cut through the winter air with startling clarity. The bodyguards spun toward her, hands near their coats, but the billionaire lifted a hand, signaling them to wait. His eyes, sharp and tired, studied her with the brief impatience reserved for strangers asking for money. But Maria's gaze did not waver. She stood rooted to the concrete, shivering, her hands trembling not just from the cold, but from the certainty coiling inside her chest. "There's something wrong with that food," she whispered. "I smelled it. Back there." She gestured weakly toward the alley. "It's spoiled. Not normal spoiled, dangerous." The billionaire glanced at his bodyguards, then back at her. His expression shifted, annoyance first, then doubt, then something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or a flicker of respect for the certainty in her voice. "What did you say?" he asked, stepping closer. Maria swallowed. Her throat felt raw. "Please, don't eat it." For a moment, the city held its breath. Snow began to drift between them, catching in the glow of the street lamp like tiny shards of glass. The billionaire lowered the fork slowly, his gaze narrowing as he inspected the dish. Something about her tone, quiet, desperate, unwavering, lodged itself in his mind. And in that fragile moment, under a dim light, in the coldest hour of night, two lives that had never been meant to cross suddenly collided. It was the whisper that would change everything.
The billionaire's name, though Maria did not know it then, was Evan Sterling, a man who had built his fortune on the promise that food could be made smarter, safer, more efficient. His company had become a quiet empire in the background of American life, supplying meals to offices, schools, and hospitals. Yet now he stared at the dish in his hands as if it were a stranger he no longer trusted. He lifted the lid and inhaled, not deeply, but enough for his brow to tighten almost imperceptibly. It was a subtle change, but Maria saw it, and something in her chest loosened. She wasn't invisible in that moment. She wasn't crazy, or desperate, or mistaken. She was right, and something in him recognized it. Evan gestured to one of the bodyguards. "Get the testing kit." A small metal case was retrieved from the SUV. Evan knelt slightly, the cold seeping into the hem of his expensive coat. He pulled out strips, swabs, and a small handheld scanner that blinked to life with a soft mechanical chime. He applied the tools with the clinical familiarity of someone who had been part of the industry long enough to know every protocol. And then, after a moment, the device emitted a single sharp beep. Evan froze. The bodyguards moved instinctively, one stepping forward, one retreating to scan the perimeter, their routines built on worst-case scenarios. But Evan's stillness was different. His pupils narrowed, his jaw locked, and for the first time since stepping out of the SUV, he looked genuinely shaken. He stood slowly, eyes fixed on the scanner's tiny red warning light. "What's the reading?" one guard asked. Evan barely responded. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Contaminant levels far above safety thresholds. This shouldn't be possible." Maria felt the cold creep back in as fear curled inside her. What if he blamed her? What if he thought she had tampered with something? She took a timid step back, her instinct to flee rising like a reflex older than her memories. But Evan turned to her, not with accusation, but with something she had not expected from a man like him. Respect. And beneath that, a disquieting mix of confusion and dread. "How did you know?" he asked. His voice was calmer than the chaos stirring behind his eyes. Maria swallowed hard. "I smelled another one in the trash. It wasn't right. And I've worked with food all my life. I know when something is dangerous." Evan studied her carefully. She looked small, half hidden inside her oversized coat, hair tangled from weeks without shelter, cheeks marked by the wind and exhaustion. But her eyes, dark, steady, certain, told a different story, one that didn't fit the assumptions that wealth often carved into the minds of men like him. He stepped closer, ignoring the slight tension in his bodyguards. "What's your name?" Her instinct screamed not to answer. Names had power when you were undocumented, when the world held more ways to harm you than help you. But his tone wasn't demanding. It was human, careful in a way she had rarely encountered. "Maria," she whispered. He nodded once, as though committing it to memory. "Maria, you may have just saved my life." A sudden heaviness filled the air. She wasn't sure what to say. Gratitude from the wealthy usually came in the form of a quick thank you, followed by the expected request to leave. She braced herself for the moment he would retreat into the warmth of his SUV and disappear forever. Instead, he spoke again, softer this time. "Are you hungry?" The question hit her harder than she expected. Hunger was a constant companion, but rarely did anyone ask about it. Not strangers, not neighbors, certainly not billionaires. For a fleeting second, she imagined what it might feel like to accept, to sit somewhere warm, to eat something she didn't have to bargain with. But caution overrode the fantasy. "I don't want charity," she murmured. Evan seemed to consider this. "It's not charity," he said quietly. "It's gratitude. And I need to talk to you." The words unsettled her. Talk to her? About what? She was nobody. She slept under awnings and counted coins for soup. She had no place in the world he inhabited. Before she could respond, Evan turned to his bodyguards. "We're taking her with us." Panic surged in Maria's chest. "No, I can't. I don't want to go anywhere." Evan raised a hand, pausing her fear. "Not far. Just to my office a few blocks away. It's safe, warm. I won't let anything happen to you." She hesitated, torn between instinct and the strange sincerity in his voice. And then her stomach growled, loud enough for one of the guards to pretend not to hear. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. "Please," Evan said gently, "at least come inside. You can leave whenever you want." His tone softened the raw edges of her fear, and after a long moment, she nodded. Not because she trusted him, but because exhaustion and hunger had taken too much from her already. The guards opened the SUV. Maria climbed inside, the leather seats swallowing her in warmth she had nearly forgotten. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something clean, like a distant echo of the life she had once imagined she might have had. As they drove through the glowing streets, she pressed her face lightly against the window, watching the city blur into fragments of light. She wondered if she had made a mistake, if she was stepping into something dangerous. But the warmth lulled her, the aches of the day sinking deeper into her bones. Minutes later, the SUV stopped in front of a sleek glass building. They escorted her up a narrow private elevator that hummed softly, rising floor by floor until it opened into a vast office suspended above the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched across the skyline, revealing a New York she had never seen from this height. Evan motioned towards a seat near a long wooden table. "Sit, I'll get you something." She remained standing, uncertain whether she belonged in a place like this, but after a moment her legs gave out and she sank into the chair. Evan returned with a bowl of hot broth. Not a corporate meal, not a packaged dish, but something simple, real. He placed it in front of her. Maria hesitated only a moment before lifting the spoon. The heat filled her mouth, her chest, her entire being. She closed her eyes, inhaling the steam like oxygen. Evan watched her quietly, not pitying, not calculating, just watching. When she finally looked up, he spoke. "Maria, that contaminant you smelled, it shouldn't be possible. If you sensed it before any machine did, then something is very, very wrong inside my company." She felt a chill, unrelated to the cold outside. He leaned forward. "I need your help." Her heart thudded once, painfully. I don't understand." Evan's voice dropped low and unguarded. "You saw something no one else did, and if you're right, someone might be trying to destroy everything I've built." He paused. And I need to know why. Maria stared at him, the steam curling between them like a fragile bridge. She hadn't expected her whisper to matter. She hadn't expected anything. But tonight, without meaning to, she had stepped into a world far more dangerous and far more transformative than she could have ever imagined. And nothing about her life would remain the same.
The night settled heavily over the city, thick as velvet against the office windows. But inside Evan Sterling's glass fortress, Maria felt exposed beneath the brightness of lights, too clean, too white, too sharp. She sat with her hands wrapped around the empty bowl, letting the last trace of warmth seep into her fingertips. She was afraid to put it down, afraid somehow that once she released it, the entire moment would vanish, and she would wake on the frozen sidewalk, her whisper lost to the wind. Evan stood across from her, pacing slowly, the tension in his shoulders growing as he replayed the scanner's warning over and over in his mind. Every few steps, he glanced at the meal box on his desk, as if it were a bomb waiting to detonate. To him, it wasn't just spoiled food. It was the unraveling of a system he believed he had perfected. A flaw in Sterling Foods meant lawsuits, recalls, chaos. But deeper than that, it meant betrayal, by his own people, or worse, a deliberate attack. For a moment, his eyes drifted back to Maria, and he studied her with a curiosity that unsettled her. Not because it felt predatory, not at all, but because she couldn't remember the last time someone truly looked at her. Not at her coat, or her hunger, or her poverty, but at her, the person buried alive beneath those layers of survival. "You said you smelled it before even opening the box," he finally said, stopping mid-stride. Most trained inspectors wouldn't have caught that. Maria stiffened. "It was nothing. I recognized it." "It wasn't nothing." He approached, leaning a hip against the table. "You detected something that bypassed automated quality checks, chemical sensors, heat trackers, bacterial monitors, systems I spent billions developing." Her stomach tightened at the number. Billions. She came from a world where a handful of coins could mean dinner or hunger. The distance between them felt insurmountable. "I worked with food my whole life. Since I was a child. We had no machines. We used our senses. You learn to tell when something is wrong. The smell," she paused, searching for the right words. "It's like it changes the air around it. It tells you a story." He listened, and something softened behind his eyes, an understanding that couldn't be learned in boardrooms or university labs. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, his expression shifting as he scanned the screen. "The contamination alert was just triggered in one of our distribution hubs." His voice dropped, urgent. "Damn it, this is spreading." A sickening weight settled in Maria's chest. She hadn't meant to bring this storm into her life. She had only wanted to keep him from poisoning himself. She hadn't imagined her whisper would ripple into chaos. Evan stepped away to make several calls, his voice low but tense, as he issued orders, demanded test results, and urged his team to track patterns in the supply chain. His authority filled the room like electricity. He spoke to executives, lab specialists, security investigators, an entire world operating at speeds she had never seen. But every so often, his gaze drifted to Maria, as if she were the thread at the center of a web he didn't yet understand. When he finally ended the last call, he exhaled sharply and dragged a hand through his hair. "It's worse than we thought," he said, turning toward her. "There are inconsistencies across multiple batches, and the ones spoiled earliest match the distribution cluster near this neighborhood." Maria lowered her eyes. She didn't know what to say. The responsibility felt too heavy, too big for someone who slept under tarps and cardboard. Evan took a slow breath. "I know you're exhausted, and I know you don't trust me yet, but you sensed something none of us did. If you're willing, I need you to come with me to one of the labs." Her breath hitched. "A lab? No, I can't.
They'll ask questions. They'll want papers, and Her voice trailed into shame. Evan understood immediately, though she hadn't said it outright. His expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. Guilt for a system he benefited from, one that had no place for someone like her except in the shadows. "You won't need paperwork," he said softly. "Not with me there. I'll handle everything." She shook her head. "Why me? I'm nobody." "No," he said firmly, pulling a chair closer so he could sit across from her at eye level. "You're the only person who noticed the truth before it hurt anyone. That makes you invaluable." The words struck her like a blow. Invaluable. She couldn't remember the last time she had been valuable in any sense. Not to employers who replaced her when her hands blistered, not to strangers who stepped around her on sidewalks, not even to the country she came from, whose poverty had pushed her to leave. Her voice wavered. "What if I'm wrong? What if I just imagined it?" Evan shook his head. "My scanners don't lie. And you were right before the machine even finished running. I'm asking you because you have something no one else does." She stared at him, overwhelmed. For a moment, they were both silent. The city hummed beneath them, distant and unaware of the small human crossroads unfolding above its streets. Then, unexpectedly, Evan stood and walked to a cabinet near the window. He opened it, pulled out a soft gray blanket, and approached her. "You're freezing," he murmured. She hesitated before accepting it, clutching the warmth around her shoulders. Her eyes stung. No one had offered her a blanket in years. People offered her suspicion, caution, avoidance, but this simple humanity, felt like a fragile gift. "You can sleep here tonight if you want. My team will work through the night. I won't make you go anywhere until you're ready." She blinked hard. "Why are you doing this for me?" He paused, considering the question with unusual sincerity. "Because you saved my life, and because I think you've been walked past too many times." Her throat tightened painfully. She looked away, afraid he might see the tremble in her lips. Evan dimmed the lights, leaving the room in a warm golden glow. The city stretched outside the window like a glittering sea. Maria pulled the blanket tighter, staring out across the skyline. She remembered nights in Chiapas when the stars seemed close enough to touch, nights filled with the smell of masa dough and firewood, nights when she believed the world still held a place for her. Now, she wasn't sure what she believed. Her life had been a straight descent for so long that the possibility of rising, even slightly, felt like a dangerous hope. "You can rest," Evan said gently. "We'll continue in the morning." She nodded, though her mind churned too fast for sleep. As she settled into the soft chair, her eyes drifted to the mule box on the desk, the catalyst of everything, the thing that had carried her whisper into a man's world. Evan stepped away to take another call, his voice fading into a distant murmur. Maria closed her eyes, but her thoughts spiraled. What if she had stepped into something that could swallow her whole? What if this contamination was part of something darker? What if helping Evan meant exposing herself? And yet, a strange warmth pulsed in her chest. For the first time in years, someone had seen her. The blanket hugged her shoulders. The city lights blinked softly, and as her breathing steadied, exhaustion finally pulled her under. Though not into the hollow sleep of cold nights and cardboard beds. Tonight she drifted into something different, something she dared not name, because naming it would make it real, and real things were the most fragile of all.
Morning crept slowly into the glass office, its light soft and reluctant, as if unsure whether it belonged in a place so sterile and so heavy with the previous night's revelations. Maria woke before Evan returned, blinking against the brightness as she adjusted to the unfamiliar comfort of warmth. For a moment, she felt disoriented. No cardboard beneath her, no cold biting through layers, no distant roar of early traffic. Instead, she felt the quiet hum of machines behind the walls, the faint rustle of city wind brushing the windows, and the lingering scent of the broth she'd eaten hours before. She sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. it felt dangerous to enjoy the warmth, dangerous to enjoy anything she hadn't earned. Her life had taught her that the universe punished hope more reliably than failure. And yet, even as fear nudged her ribs, she couldn't deny that something subtle had shifted inside her. A small, trembling space had opened, an unfamiliar room where possibility lived. The elevator chimed. Evans stepped out, his posture taut, the tension in his jaw unmistakable. He carried a tablet under one arm and a paper cup of coffee in the other. When he saw her awake, his features softened, but the exhaustion in his eyes didn't fade. "You didn't have to get up," he said, offering her the coffee. She shook her head, hesitant. I don't want to take more than I should." "You saved my life," he replied. "You're allowed a cup of coffee." The cup warmed her hands and she inhaled its aroma before taking a small sip. She had forgotten what real coffee tasted like, not the cheap instant packets she sometimes found unopened in trash bags, but the kind brewed from fresh beans that tasted of earth and smoke and comfort. Evan set the tablet on the table. "There's been another alert, and a journalist caught wind of it. The story hasn't broken yet, but it will. We're running out of time." Maria lowered the cup, her stomach tightening. "What do you need me to do?" Evan hesitated. His eyes searched hers, as if measuring her strength, her fear, her willingness to step further into a world she had never been invited into. "Come with me to the lab. I want you to smell a few samples. If you can detect contamination faster than our equipment, we might be able to trace the source." Her breath caught. She placed the coffee cup on the table with great care, as though sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile trust existed between them. "I don't belong in a lab," she whispered. "People like me, we stay invisible." He stepped closer, folding his arms. "You don't have to stay invisible anymore." The words hit her harder than he realized. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. A sharp, instinctive panic rose inside her. Panic born from years of being overlooked, dismissed, or worse, punished simply for being present. "You don't understand," she said, voice trembling. "When you're undocumented, being seen can be dangerous." He exhaled, regret flickering through his expression. "You're right. I should have thought about that." He paused. "But I can protect you, Maria. I promise." She shook her head. "No one can protect people like me." Evan's gaze steadied. "Maybe not before, but now you're with me, and I don't break my promises." The certainty in his tone stirred something deep inside her, something she had tried to bury beneath years of disappointment. She looked into his eyes and saw no judgment, no pity, no calculation, only conviction. Dangerous conviction. Conviction that could lift her up or crush her completely. Finally, she nodded. The drive to the lab was tense. Evan spoke into his phone the entire time, issuing orders, asking for updates, trying to contain a crisis he hadn't fully understood. Maria sat in the back with one of the guards, her fingers gripping the seatbelt so tightly her knuckles ached. The city outside blurred past her window, streets she knew intimately from the ground, now rushing beneath her from a height she had never traveled before. When they arrived, the building rose like a monolith of tinted glass, guarded by security systems that made her heart pound. Evan guided her through the lobby with a calm ease that contrasted sharply with her fear. White floors, white walls, white coats. Everything too clean, too bright, too loud with silence. Inside one of the testing rooms, lab technicians paused when they saw her. Their eyebrows lifted, just slightly, but she saw it. The silent question, who is she? Why is she here? They disguised it quickly with polite nods, but the sting remained like a bruise inside her chest. "This is Maria," Evan said, introducing her with a tone that left no space for dismissal. "She's assisting in the contamination identification process." A few exchanged glances, but no one argued. Evan motioned to a metal table lined with sealed containers. "We'll open them one at a time. If you smell anything unusual, anything at all, tell me immediately." Her heart pounded. The technicians donned gloves, masks, and goggles. Maria had nothing but her senses and a lifetime of experience that had never mattered to anyone with power until last night. The first container was opened. The scent was fresh. Clean chicken, a hint of rosemary, nothing dangerous. Maria inhaled carefully, then shook her head. "This one is fine." The second container. Again, nothing wrong. The third, a faint shift in the air, barely noticeable. Something like metal warmed by the sun. A whisper of bitterness beneath the surface. Her eyes widened. "This one," she murmured. Evan signaled the technicians. They ran the scanner across the sample. A series of lights blinked rapidly, then turned red. "Contaminated," a technician said, disbelief sharpening his tone. They opened 3 more. Maria identified 2 before the machines did. Each time the technicians grew quieter, more attentive, more reverent. Evan watched her with something like awe, an intensity that made her chest tighten. Finally, when the last container was tested, Evan stepped aside with her, lowering his voice. "You just did what would have taken a full team 30 minutes. You cut that down to seconds." She looked down at her trembling hands. "I don't understand how this helps." "It helps," he said softly, "because someone is tampering with our food, and your instincts may be the only thing standing between us and disaster." Her pulse quickened. Why would someone do this? Evan's expression darkened. "There are a few possibilities: competitors, saboteurs, or someone inside the company with access." He paused. "But whoever it is, they knew how to evade detection systems. They didn't expect someone like you." She felt the weight of those words. Someone like you. A poor immigrant woman who slept on the street. Someone the world wasn't supposed to notice. A technician approached timidly. "Mr. Sterling, you should see this. The contamination isn't random. It's targeted. All affected batches share a single distribution point." Evan stiffened. "Which one?" The technician hesitated, then answered. "Sterling Foods Warehouse 6. Maria glanced at Evan, confused by the sudden shift in his energy. Evan's jaw clenched. "My brother runs Warehouse 6. The room fell silent. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Maria felt the air thicken around them. Something darker than spoiled food was beginning to rise to the surface. Something that smelled of betrayal. She had stepped into this world by accident, but the doorway she had opened now revealed not just danger, but the deepest fault line inside the Sterling Empire. And she was no longer sure she could walk away from it.
The drive back to the tower was silent at first, heavy with the weight of a truth neither of them wanted to acknowledge too quickly. Evan stared out the window of the SUV, jaw tight, eyes unfocused, as if the city lights flickering past might somehow rearrange themselves into a different reality, one in which his own brother wasn't implicated in the kind of treachery that could collapse an empire. Maria watched him quietly, aware that the pain radiating from him had little to do with business and everything to do with the slow, crushing fracture of family. She had known betrayal before, the kind that hollowed the chest and poisoned memory. It shocked her how familiar his silence felt, how human he suddenly became in it. Billionaire or not, grief was an equalizer. It spared no one. When they reached the office, Evan didn't sit. He moved to the window instead, hands in his pockets, staring down at a city that looked impossibly small from this height. Maria remained near the table, folding the blanket she had used the night before. She felt like an intruder in this moment, yet somehow also essential to it, as if fate had threaded her into a story that was now beyond her choosing. Finally, Evan spoke. "My brother wouldn't do this." The words trembled between denial and hope. "He's stubborn, reckless, but he wouldn't sabotage his own company." "People you love can still break you," Maria said softly. Evan turned, surprised not by the statement, but by the quiet certainty in her voice. "Someone broke you?" he asked, gently. She hesitated. Her past usually stayed buried, unspoken, unseen, but something about this moment felt like an exchange they both needed. "Yes," she whispered. "More than one. Some by accident, some on purpose, and once, someone I thought I could trust." She swallowed. "But betrayal has a smell to it, not the food kind, the human kind. And sometimes the last person you expect is the one who leaves the deepest bruise." Evan's shoulders sagged. He didn't argue again. He sank into a chair, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Maria sat across from him, not touching, not intruding, simply present, an anchor in the storm of his unraveling certainty. He took a breath that seemed to cost him something, then said, "I need proof. I need to see what's actually happening inside Warehouse 6, and I need you with me." Her pulse jumped. "Me? You smelled what machines missed. Whoever's behind this doesn't expect you. That makes you our advantage." Fear rippled through her. The warehouse would be dangerous, not physically perhaps, but for someone like her, being seen there meant risking questions, exposure, the kind of trouble she had spent years trying to outrun. But Evan's gaze held hers, full of earnestness and something quieter: trust. And trust, she realized, was its own kind of warmth. "When do we go?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Now." Warehouse 6 loomed at the edge of Brooklyn, like a sleeping beast. Vast, metallic, and cold against the early evening sky. Evan entered with a badge swipe that unlocked the main gate with a heavy clank. Maria stayed close, her heart thundering. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating rows of stacked packages in sterile aisles that stretched endlessly. It smelled of cardboard, metal, and something else, something faintly chemical. Evan walked ahead, searching for anything out of place. Maria let her senses open, tuning into the subtle shifts in the air the way she once watched for weather changes in Chiapas. The first few rows smelled normal, clean, safe. But then, something caught her, a whisper of bitterness, a wrongness so faint it barely touched the edge of perception. She stopped. "Here." Evan rushed to her side. "Are you sure?" She nodded. He pulled a box from the pallet, opening it with trembling fingers. Inside were sealed meal packs identical to the ones she'd smelled the night before. Maria inhaled gently. Yes, there it was, the scent that clung too tightly to the air, sharp beneath the surface. "This batch is tainted," Maria murmured. Before Evan could respond, a voice echoed from the far end of the warehouse. "You shouldn't be here." They turned. A man stepped out of the shadows, tall, clean-cut, wearing a company jacket. His expression flickered between shock and something darker. Evan stiffened. "Daniel?" Maria froze. Daniel Sterling, Evan's younger brother. He approached slowly, eyes darting between them. "You shouldn't have come here, Evan." Evan took a step forward. "Tell me the truth. Did you do this?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "You think I'd poison our own products? Our own customers? You think I'm that kind of person?" Then explain the contamination. Explain why every trail leads right here. Daniel's hesitation was small, but not small enough. Something inside Maria twisted. She watched the brothers face each other, their silhouettes framed by the sterile lights overhead. This wasn't about business. This was about resentment carved slowly over years, about shadows cast by success and the wounds that festered when one sibling grew too fast for the other to keep up with. Daniel finally spoke, voice trembling with anger and something like shame. I didn't poison the food, but I looked the other way. I ignored complaints. I rushed shipments. I pushed for quotas we couldn't safely maintain. I thought the system caught everything. He swallowed. But you replaced people with machines, Evan. Sensors aren't loyalty. Algorithms don't care. And when a distributor started cutting corners, I didn't stop them. Evan staggered back as if struck. The truth bloomed between them, ugly and undeniable. Not sabotage, neglect. The slow rot of complacency. Maria watched silently as Evan's gaze hardened, not with hatred, but with heartbreak. You should have told me, Evan whispered. Daniel looked away. You never listened before. The silence that followed was a canyon, and in that vast space, Maria understood why fate had dragged her into this. Her nose had uncovered a truth much deeper than spoiled food. This was a family fractured by success, by pride, by the blind spots money created. Evan finally exhaled. We're shutting down this warehouse, immediately, and you're stepping aside while we fix what you ignored. Daniel's eyes glistened. He didn't fight. He simply nodded and walked away, shoulders heavy with a lifetime of comparison. When he was gone, Evan leaned against a pallet, face buried in his hands. Maria approached slowly. You did the right thing, she murmured. It doesn't feel like it, he whispered. Truth rarely does. He looked up at her then, gratitude shining through grief. I couldn't have done this without you. Maria shook her head. I'm nobody. No, he said softly. You're the reason this company will survive. His voice broke slightly. And I want you to help rebuild it. Her breath caught. What? I want you on the food safety team, not as a token, as my partner. I want to build a new division, human-led, instinct-driven, built around the knowledge people like you carry, not machines, not algorithms. You. Her eyes filled. Evan, I don't have papers. I don't have a home. I don't have anything. You will, he said firmly. I'll take care of everything. Your residency, your salary, your safety. You saved me, Maria. Let me save you back. Tears blurred the warehouse lights into halos. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was purpose, something she had lost long before hunger ever found her. She nodded, unable to speak. Months passed. Maria del Sol rose not suddenly but steadily, step by uncertain step, until she stood at the head of a new department inside Sterling Foods, Human Sensory Integrity, the first program in its kind in the country. Her instincts, once dismissed as nothing more than survival, became the backbone of a multi-million-dollar initiative. Her expertise drew chefs, scientists, inspectors, and community workers into a space where human senses were valued as precision instruments. Evan kept every promise, her documents, her apartment, her safety, and more than anything, her dignity. And 1 year later, she stood outside a new building, her building, its glass doors reflecting the sunrise. Her name shimmered next to Evan's on the sign. Sterling del Sol Institute for Food Safety and Human Sensing. Once she had whispered to save a stranger. Now the world whispered her name with respect. She touched the letters gently, remembering the cold nights, the cardboard, the hunger, the loneliness. Every scar,